By definition, what is body dysmorphic disorder, and is it the same thing as having a negative body image?
Great question. Thanks for asking me to clarify that. And I think we sort of throw these terms around quite interchangeably, and they are quite different things. So everyone has a sense of body image. It's our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are related to our body. And sadly, having pretty negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around our body is quite common. And so some people have called this a normative discontent, which is how we're sort of conceptualizing body image at the moment. Body dysmorphic disorder is a clinical disorder that we'll find in all of our psychiatry diagnostic manuals. And it's characterized by a couple of things, but obviously being very concerned about your appearance is a key factor. And generally it focuses on a specific part of the body, maybe your nose, your hairline, your skin, something like that. This concern is so debilitating that it really has such negative impacts on the rest of your life. So maybe you might even be so concerned about others seeing you can't even leave your house. Maybe you won't even have dinner with your family members because you're so concerned about this particular appearance concern. So it is just, it's negative body image on steroids, really. It is just such a debilitating disorder, and people will go to great lengths to camouflage or engage in compulsive behaviors just to try and alleviate these concerns.
I used the term body dysmorphia. Is that synonymous with body dysmorphic disorder?
It is, yeah, and I think because body dysmorphic disorder has it's I suppose undergone its own kind of morphing in our diagnostic manuals, and so the term we use most commonly now is body dysmorphic disorder.
And how prevalent is this?
So body dysmorphic disorder we estimate as occurring in about 1 to 2% of the population. So that's pretty high, and I actually think that's quite an underreport because this is quite an understudied topic and people are quite ashamed of it. And I think something that people might not be aware of is just that it seems to affect genders fairly similarly as opposed to, I say, maybe eating disorders, which is a little bit more female dominated, but body dysmorphic disorder seems to impact across the gender spectrum.
And is it something that typically begins in early life, in adolescence, or is it also common for someone to kind of go through childhood and adolescence and have a very positive body image, but then develop body dysmorphic disorder later as an adult?
I think developing as an adult is a little bit less common. I can imagine, though, there are certain times of life where our appearance can change quite radically. So they can be, I suppose, risk points. I'm thinking of things like, say, pregnancy and stuff like that, where bodies change a lot. But generally speaking, it is an adolescent onset for a body dysmorphic disorder.
And I'm assuming there's been studies comparing populations across the world that live in different environments, trying to tease out what are the risk factors for this condition? How much of it is our environment? Is a portion of it genetic? What do we kind of understand here?
I wish I could tell everyone more, all your listeners, because I feel like at the moment we're very much in the dark about the etiology of body dysmorphic disorder. We know it can certainly run in families, so there is that genetic component, but there is also environment. And I do wonder, certainly there's been a lot more research in Western countries, but I have the assumption that body dysmorphic disorder is in other countries too, and we just haven't looked for it.
Yeah, even the idea of it running in families, this is interesting, right? Because we often see various chronic diseases run in families, but families not only share the same genes or similar genes, but also often share the same lifestyles. So then it becomes a question as to, why is it running in families? You mentioned eating disorders before. What percentage of eating disorders are driven by body dysmorphia?
When we talk about eating disorders, we say that over-evaluation of our weight and shape, and the control of these is a core psychopathology. Basically, it's at the core of a lot of things. But I just want to acknowledge that there are, say, disorders like avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID. It's unfortunately what people call picky eating, but that doesn't have body image at its core. So there are eating disorders that don't have any body image concerns associated. But I suppose the ones that people are very familiar with, like anorexia and bulimia, yes, body image concerns are at the core. It's sort of 100% strike rate there that people will have a negative body image that is driving a lot of the behaviors.
What about orthorexia?
Yes, and I mean, orthorexia is another one that's not in our diagnostic manuals yet, and some people would argue that orthorexia isn't a separate diagnosis, that it's anorexia of another kind. But just for our listeners, it tends to be sort of a focus on clean eating, quote unquote clean, I should say. And I suppose I see orthorexia commonly when someone is recovering from anorexia and they're like, hey, I know I have to eat, but I'm going to eat in this very restricted, obsessive, structured way. That is where I see orthorexia pop up most commonly. And I can assure you it is quite as debilitating, even though people are like, well, I'm still eating, but really it's such a limited range of foods. And if they deviate from that, they're just so distressed. And just the obsessional way it is about something being clean or organic, it's pretty tricky. And body image concerns would play into that.
Hey friends, are you ready to take your fermented food game and gut health to the next level? Look no further than my digital guide, Plant-Based Ferments. Inside, you'll discover some of my favorite recipes, including my soy labneh and homemade kombucha. Visit theproof.com/ferments for more details. That's theproof.com/ferments. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's get back to the episode. Can orthorexia be disguised in certain circumstances as someone who is living a very healthy lifestyle, health-seeking behaviors?
And you're absolutely right. And I think, so orthorexia, because it's not in that diagnostic manual, I think just the definition of it is still a little bit wishy-washy. And certainly people will say, well, I like to eat a healthy diet. And I'm like, go right ahead. I think where the orthorexia part kicks in is just the obsessionality around it and the inability to deviate. So when someone eats something that's not in their meal plan, when they're asked, when they decline every dinner invitation because they don't know everything on the menu, like where they, for example, decline dinner invites because they have to be at the gym a certain number of hours. So it's kind of the rigidity and the obsessionality that is the issue rather than following a healthy diet.
And just in case someone's not familiar with eating disorders, what is the difference between anorexia and bulimia?
Anorexia typically involves someone in a low body weight, so they are calorie restricted, and they have a really intense fear of gaining weight. And I cannot understate that fear of gaining weight. That is what drives the restriction. There are a couple of different types of anorexia. So there's the restrictive subtype, but there's also the binge purge subtype where they will occasionally, they'll engage in binging and vomiting, but they still have a low weight. So that's anorexia binge purge subtype. But if someone is in a normal weight body or above, and I hate to use the term normal weight, by the way, then that becomes a diagnosis of bulimia nervosa. So they'll be binging and then they'll compensate, quote unquote, in some way. So it might be vomiting, laxative use, diet, pills, excessive exercise. There'll be some kind of compensation. And so bulimia is normal weight and above. Anorexia is low weight.
And is it true, or I may have this incorrect, but is it true that perhaps counterintuitively eating disorders are more common in people that are overweight than underweight?
Thank you so much for raising that, Simon. I'm really thrilled that you did. Yes, because they're told that they need to lose weight, and that can drive people into an eating disorder. So I've been doing some really exciting work on weight stigma recently. So basically stigmatizing people on the size of their bodies. And indeed, eating disorders are more common in larger bodied people.
Is it the ESP? Is that the screening tool that is used to diagnose disordered eating, or the most common one?
I tend to use the EDEQ as our diagnostic tool, the Eating Disorder Examination Questionnaire. I know your audience is all over the world, but in Australia, for our clinical cutoffs, whether people get support from the government for their treatment, we use the EDEQ as our determination.
What are the most common triggers? And I appreciate this might overlap with some of our discussion so far and the use of social media and comparison. But what are the most common identified triggers that might lead to someone developing disordered eating in the first place?
Yeah, and I think it is that interplay of genetics and environment again. And I wish we knew more about eating disorder origins, because that would be really, really helpful for all of us. But certainly from the research, if anyone is engaging in a dieting behavior from a young age, that can be very, very harmful. So that caloric restriction when you're meant to be growing, that's a big trigger. We often find that childhood anxiety precedes an eating disorder. So someone with a bit more anxious temperament, they might even be seeing a psychologist from a young age for anxiety. That's something else. Obviously, running in families, just like body dysmorphic disorder as well. So genetics, but also, I suppose, seeing someone else in their family experiencing an eating disorder.
Yeah, so it comes back, I guess, again, we spoke about parents and what they can do, and being a good role model in terms of how you speak to yourself, how you use social media, yourself in your own life. I have to imagine here that if a child is seeing their parent, spend a lot of time focusing on dietary restriction, that might begin to kind of rub off on them at some stage.
Indeed, and we'll get parents say to us, "Oh, but I've never said anything negative to my child about their body and their eating." But children are like sponges, and they will observe how you're eating and how you're talking about your body. And if you're talking about being on diets all the time and being dissatisfied and wanting to lose weight, then that is going to impact how they view themselves, even if you've never said anything directly.